Mustapha leaned lazily against the wall around the flat roof of his housetop. He looked out across the other housetops of the city to the tall minaret that towered above the mosque. It was Friday, and soon the muezzin would climb the tower and give the Muslim call to prayer. Ever since Mustapha had seen the Christian named Layla pray to God, he had spent many hours staring at the minaret from this rooftop. Every time he saw it, he wondered, how can I know God as Layla does? Mustapha jumped when the call finally came. The muezzin's harsh voice crackled across the city from the loudspeaker. The words were the same as always. 5 times each day, every day of his life, Mustapha had heard the Muslim call to prayer. Allah is most great, Allah is most great, the muezzin called out in Arabic. Allah is most great, Allah is most great. Then came the next line of the familiar chant. I bear witness there is no God but Allah. I bear witness there is no God but Allah. I bear witness that Muhammad is Allah's prophet. I bear witness that Muhammad is Allah's prophet. Allah is most great. Allah is most great. There is no God but Allah. As if drawn by some magic force, men and boys began to stream out of the houses of the city. Mustapha walked to the low wall separating his house from others. Looking down, he could see them winding through the streets toward the mosque. On Fridays, every good Muslim man attends mosque for midday prayer. The rest of the week, when the muezzin calls, everyone simply stops what he's doing, and if he can't make it to the mosque, he spreads out a prayer rug and begins the ritual of prayer. Mustapha's father stood in the doorway now and watched him for a while. My son, father said, you think too much. Come with me to prayer. Mustapha walked slowly beside his father toward the mosque. Neither of them spoke. The only sound was that of their soft leather sandals scuffing across the rough cobblestone streets. Mustapha studied the deep wrinkles around his father's eyes. The rest of his face was hidden beneath his heavy beard. Will I still be saying the same empty words for prayer when I am as old as my father, he wondered? Why can't I just talk to God? He wanted to ask his father these questions, but he couldn't. His father would not have answered. His father didn't have answers to give. But as if he knew Mustapha's thoughts, father repeated one of the ancient hadith or traditions of Islam. Remember, my son, prayer is like a stream of sweat water which flows past the door of each one of us. A Muslim plunges into it 5 times a day. We are put here to pray. That is the purpose of life. A stream of sweet water? Mustapha thought. He remembered the times he and Rashid had jumped into the river on hot, dry summer days. The cool water around him made him feel fresh and alive. His times of Muslim prayer didn't make him feel that way at all. When they arrived at the mosque, Mustapha and his father slipped off their shoes. No one dared to enter this holy place with their shoes on. Everything they did from here on would do what Muslim worshippers had been doing for centuries. Mustapha carried his shoes with him into the mosque. He and his father found a place near the fountain in the courtyard. They laid down their prayer rugs and set their shoes in front of them. Then they went to the fountain to begin the familiar ritual of cleansing themselves for prayer. First, Mustapha washed his hands 3 times. Then he cupped his hand and brought some water to his mouth. He rinsed 3 times. The last time, he rubbed his finger across his teeth to wash them. Mustapha didn't know any other way to try to make himself acceptable to Allah but to follow the washing procedure as Muslims had always done. And so with great ceremony, he continued the process of cleansing. He reached into the water again. This time, he brought the water up to his nose. Closing his mouth, he drew a deep breath through his nose. The water rushed up his nostrils, and before he choked, he blew it out again. This was the part of cleansing that Mustapha hated most. But the Prophet Muhammad had said he must do these things in order to be accepted. Then he scooped up water in his hands and splashed his face. He was careful to rub water on his face with both hands, beginning at the top of his forehead and going all the way down to the tip of his chin. He paid particular attention to the sunken-in parts of his eyelids and the bottom of his nose. Today, Mustapha wanted to especially please Allah, so he washed his face 3 times, the most recommended by the Prophet. Perhaps my prayers mean nothing to me because I have not cleansed well enough, Mustapha thought. So he washed his hands again, this time one at a time. He scrubbed his arms all the way up to the elbows. Following that, Mustapha used his fingers to run water through his hair, from the forehead all the way to the back of his neck. Then he poured water on his 2 index fingers and on his 2 thumbs and wiped his ears, inside and out. And of course he had to wash his feet. The feet were most important. Mustapha washed his right foot by pouring water from his hand onto it and rubbing. He scrubbed a little at a time until his whole foot was washed up to the ankles. 3 times he washed this foot. He was careful to run his fingers between his toes and rub the little callus or hard spot on the ball of his foot. Not one tiny crease could go unwashed, or Allah would not accept his prayers. Then Mustapha washed his left foot the very same way. When all of this was finished, Mustapha said in Arabic, "O Allah, grant that I might be among the repentant and the purified." Surely, he thought, I have done everything the prophet has said. This time my prayers will mean something. He walked solemnly over to where he left his shoes and joined the line of Muslims facing the city of Mecca and waited for the imam to give the signal for prayers to begin. At the imam's command, every Muslim in the courtyard of the mosque began their cycle of prayers. First they stood, and in Arabic they said in drawn-out words, Allah Akbar. Then everyone bowed and said the same thing. Next they all bent over and touched their forehead and nose to the ground to show submission to Allah. Mustapha followed each action, reciting the Arabic prayers he learned as a child. This time, though, as his forehead touched the ground, Mustapha remembered the joyful look on Layla's face when she had stood before him, praying, "Why can't I just talk to God like she did?" His mind wandered back to the Christian meeting. When he lifted his face from the ground, he noticed everyone else was already getting up. Scrambling to his knees, he warned himself, "I must give all my attention to my prayers," and he recited more Arabic words. By now, his heart so longed to know God as a real person, tears were streaming down his face. But he continued the ritual and repeated this prayer cycle another time or 2. As Mustapha recited the last of his memorized prayers, he made an important decision. "I've got to do it," he thought. "I won't let anyone or anything stop me." He looked at his father and silently apologized for the disgrace he was about to bring upon his family. After they had finished their prayers, the men stood around talking. Mustapha knew his father would stay here for hours visiting with important men of the community, so he asked if he could go on without him. Father quietly motioned him away, and Mustapha grabbed his shoes and ran for the front gate. Mustapha quickly put his shoes on. As he stepped out onto the hot pavement, someone punched him in the back. Mustapha turned quickly, fist clenched. "Rashid," he said, surprised and relieved to see his friend. Rashid looked at him suspiciously. "You sure are jumpy," he said. "What are you doing?" "Nothing," Mustapha answered defensively. "Then come on," Rashid said. "Let's go down to the orange carts and see if we can steal a treat. I'm hungry." "No," Mustapha said. I can't." "I thought you said you weren't doing anything," Rashid questioned him. "I'm not. Mustapha pulled his friend into the doorway of an empty store. "Swear to me by Allah you will not tell," Rashid whispered. "Tell what? What are you going to do?" Mustapha wondered if he should share his secret, but he and Rashid had always told each other everything. They were such good friends they usually knew what the other was thinking anyway. "I'm going back to see the Christian named Layla. I have to talk to her." Rashid looked worried. "You want to trick her, right? Do you have another plan to ruin her meeting?" Mustapha looked away from him. "No, I want to go talk to her. I must go alone, and I must go now." Rashid grabbed his arm. "Mustapha, what are you going to do?" "I can't tell you." Mustapha pulled away. "Please, leave me alone. I don't want you to get involved." Mustapha felt tears welling up in his eyes again. Quickly, he turned in shame and ran away from his friend. Rashid pleaded with him not to go. "Mustapha," he called, "they are liars! Mustapha, they are foreign dogs!" But Mustapha didn't stop. He ran off toward the house of the Christian named Layla.